Built in the early 1800s, it was built as a school. It's no longer a school, it's going to be used, transformed into private housing, and that was built as a school for deaf people, and it was always used for that purpose. And once visited by Queen Victoria, and she apparently made a suggestion that she would like to buy that building. She wanted to turn that building into the palace, rather than the palace that we actually have. And that request was refused.
Why?
The Queen was heard to murmur, in that case I don't think I'll ever come back to Edinburgh. And she really did after that. We'll have to wait and see. It's upset a lot of shopkeepers, which is fully understandable because the lack of traffic, and of course that affects the number of people who actually want to Princes Street. But it was built primarily as residential. The new town that was first planned, they started building that in 1767. That's when they started building the new town. It was to be residential. There were no shops planned whatsoever. That came much later, but it was to be private houses. It's changed quite dramatically. I mean, the one we're going to drive up George Street is the middle three, and that has a lot of the small boutiques, the sort of private shops, rather than the big department stores which are on the main street itself. And here you can start to see the buildings. They're all much the same height. This is the sort of, you can see the smoke damage quite clearly here, the building on the left on the corner, for instance. Here you can see the large number of chimney pots that I mentioned before. In the 1960s, they passed a Clean Air Act. Actually got Edinburgh to become smokeless. They got people to change over to gas and electricity. That took quite a long time to bring into effect. And once it was there, they started to clean some of the buildings. The intention was to clean them all. But what they discovered quite quickly was the methods they were using, the sandblasting, the power washing, the chemicals they were using, was actually damaging the square. It's that area which I mentioned a little bit earlier where people would spend some free time out in the open. And because it was residential, there was a law, a bylaw, still applies today, that it is only accessible to local residents. That was the whole purpose of it. You have a statue which is of Prince Albert, and he was the husband of Queen Victoria. So that's Bute House next to the George House. We're going to go into George Street just in a second here. And George Street was built, as I said before, as the main street of the new town. It was built in the highest bit of land, and this was to be the centre of the new town development. And that's the ground here that's not used except for a month in August when we have the Edinburgh Festival, and we have this is where the book festival has its location. This is where the publishing world are able to come and let people see what they're doing. They bring in a lot of writers, authors, and they do book signings. So it's quite a busy spell. I mean, Edinburgh itself in August is huge goings on, and the festivals, about 7 different festivals, all operating at the same time. And it's most amusing here. All sorts of pictures. By the yellow signs there, that's the house where Alexander Graham Bell was born. That was way back in March 1847. And he lived in Edinburgh for about 22 years before he moved over to Canada, and then down to Boston when he was working with them. Now this is George Street. This is the main street of this part of Edinburgh. The buildings on the right, you can get a little idea of the colour of the original stone, and some of those have been cleaned. And then you have a junction, and you broke away from the main body of the church. Our patron saint is St Andrew. If you look to the right, you see a statue of the door, and that's St Andrew. And again on the right hand side, if you look over the door here, you see a lighthouse. That's the Northern Lighthouse Commission's offices, and that building there is where the whole of the Scottish coastline is now controlled by computer. We no longer have man light, and that was during the reign of James V. And this is where Mary Queen of Scots actually spent some of her very first adult years here